All right, ladies and gentlemen, it appears that the legendary Vars 2 is back at it again with another Wuthering Waves video. And this time, instead of focusing on things like echo sets and some of the characters that have been buffed the most or the least across patches, or just echoes as a whole, this time Vars is going to be focused on the best team for every character. And I'm somebody that's done a lot of experimentation, right? I played around with a lot of different team comps, both on stream and on my YouTube videos. And so I'm excited to hear what Vars's take is, and whether or not I can provide some more additional context for maybe what I think about some of his decisions, maybe where some additional spiciness can be had, maybe by alternating a couple members of the comp, and how these teams actually perform in traditional gameplay. So with that, let's go ahead. Let's get right on into it. I'm excited to see what he has for Changli.
Hey guys, welcome back to another Wuthering Waves video, and for today I wanted to bring you an updated guide on the best team for each character as of 2.1. Even though it's only been a short while since I made this video back in November, a fair number of changes have been added to the game that I
would say from November up until now, there's been so many changes for so many characters, not necessarily the DPS ones, but more so on the sub DPS and maybe even the support side that are going to really help spice up some of the potential combinations over here. I'm hoping that Vars doesn't do just like their best in slot team, because I feel like the best in slot team for a lot of characters is pretty like cut and paste, not too difficult to find, but rather some of like their B team, right? Maybe if their best in slot team is an S, maybe like some of like their A and their B teams to really give more of like that variety, right? Give some more of that optionality, maybe for some of like the more free to play players who don't have every premium option. I think that would be nice to see.
think warrants a revisit, not just the new characters, but improvements to existing teams and options, as demonstrated by the release of Rocha and Phoebe.
I'm slightly confused. I'm slightly confused by the placement over here. I think he might be just referring to like the new use case of Spectro Rover and like the new coordinated attack set. And I think that's the Thundering Mephis. So I think he's just referring to the new stuff and not actually about using this combination on Rover, which it might look like at first glance. I think he's just referring to the entirely new, the new features in general.
Kudo seems to be taking a more concerted approach to specialization for team building, and they're likely to continue going down that path for the remainder of version 2. Give or take, I'll have to make a new one sometime around 2.4 or 2.5. We'll see.
Why do you know that, buddy? Why not a new one in 2.2 or 2.3? Huh? I do wonder if he's going to have information on Brant. He has Brant in the thumbnail. I wonder if he's going to have like Brant in the Changli section, because we all know that his kit's available in Crossing Stars.
For the time being, I'll be going through each character that we have so far and listing their best team, or teams if they have two that are extremely close to each other in performance.
Okay, just one.
That for some of these units, we'll be going through them in a quadrilateral square fashion, where X character's best team features Y character, but Y character's best team may not necessarily feature X. As for whether we're talking about sequences or weapons, if and when they're necessary, we can consider them, but for the most part, this video will not be based on strictly free-to-play or pay-to-win players. It could be a mixture of both. Without further ado, let's get into it. Opening up with the Aero category, we'll start with Jian. His best team has still remained the same, and I don't think it'll see any updates for a while, not until we get a new Aero or heavy attack support. So we're gonna go with Jian, Mortefi, and Shorekeeper or Verena. Mortefi's good for hypercarry driving, and being a heavy attack specialist, he's great for Jian. You can also go Alto for your secondary, or even Yang Yang for energy, but Mortefi is almost always more effective.
Absolutely. I think he's spot on the mark. And what I really liked about this section was the fact that he listed Jian's actual best alternatives. Because 1,000,000% it is Alto if you're looking for a more damage-oriented sub DPS with maybe some more like utility or survivability. And Yang Yang as well for a faster rotation time and way more increased energy regen. Definitely an option if Yang Yang is S6 and maybe your Jian is only at like 110 or like 115 ER or maybe even 100. Yang Yang is going to be a pretty big benefit over there. And so I think I'm super glad that he didn't just go over the best in slot because, well, let's be honest over here, right? Maybe someone doesn't like using Mortefi and they're looking for some different ways to play this comp. But yeah, everything here, 1000% spot on.
Speaking of which, next character is going to be Yang Yang. Yang Yang's actually gotten a bit of a boost in relevance, and it's primarily because of a new DPS character, Carlotta. Thanks to a short rotation time, a nice attack buff, and energy restoration on her outro, she can set up Carlotta fairly easily.
Absolutely.
The Glacio Gunner prefers to work with other secondaries, but since we're looking at Yang Yang specifically, you can pair her with Carlotta, and then of course, Verena or Shorekeeper.
I would say that Yang Yang also has a massive amount of synergy with a character like Zhang Liao. I think that that is one suggestion that could have been explored a little bit more over here. As we're all familiar, right? When Zhang Liao swap cancels during his rotation, he'll end up in the air. And one thing that Yang Yang can do if she's in the air with 3 Forte stacks is immediately follow up with her unique air attack. You know, the one that like looks like Virgil. She like lands on the floor and then does like the and like the final slash. You can synergize Yang Yang with a Zhang Liao hyper carry comp where Yang Yang's on Moonlit Clouds, and because Moonlit Clouds buff, it does not expire on swap, and Yang Yang doesn't have an outro skill that expires on swap. You can do a hyper carry rotation on Zhang Liao, but then proceed to essentially, right, play Yang Yang and Zhang Liao quick swap, where you're canceling all of Zhang Liao's cancelable moves across his liberation with Yang Yang. And it's a very fun comp to play. It is easily one of her best ones, and I think in some circumstances, it has potential, right, to perform at the same level, I think for Yang Yang at least, when compared to a character like Carlotta. So I think that's definitely something that he could have looked at a little bit more over here. But of course, I think Carlotta still is a very strong choice. But I would have considered the Zhang Liao alternative too, because they have a lot of synergy.
Shin, on the other hand, God bless her soul, is still in kind of a tough spot as a result
True.
of her messy kit, but she's not unusable. With her grouping capability and massive liberation damage amp, she can easily support Shangli Yao if in the event you don't have, say, Yinlin or Changli. The only condition is that you'll need a bit more energy on Shangli Yao, but for all intents and purposes, Shangli Yao, Qin and Shorekeeper or Verena make for a perfectly functioning team.
Yeah, I would say for the whole Johnshin example over here, she kind of doesn't really have any other limited liberation damage dealer. Sure, every other character in the game does like slight damage, slight liberation damage, but Zhang Liao is the main one. But when you consider Zhang Liao, it's of course going to be Yinlin as his premium support. And so she's kind of like the free-to-play alternative. Think about it this way: Zhang Liao free in 1.2, and then Johnshin free off the standard banner from Lost 50/50s. That's kind of like the alternative that a lot of people go with. So it works. It doesn't feel as good as Yinlin, obviously, but it works. And it is her best team comp. So fully agreed over here.
Alto's best team is, I kind of already spoiled it, Jian, Alto, and one of the 2 Spectro healers.
True.
Even though you can technically play Alto as a main attacker,
You can, but I don't think it's very good. The reason why I don't think it's very good is that it is one of the most useless things in the game in a multi-target situation. And what you're going to see over here is Alto struggling to kill. This is his hyper carry comp with Sanhua. Alto is going to struggle to kill these things. And the main reason why he's going to struggle is because every single attack in his kit is single target. Every single attack. There is no actual way to let him hit an AoE unless the enemies are actually like pixels away from each other. And the problem with this, guys, is sometimes the TOA is specifically holograms, right? Sometimes it'll just be single bosses, but if there are floors with like 2 elites or like 3 dogs, 4 dogs that spawn before the boss, you might as well just go fuck yourself if you're playing Alto. And that level of just like unusability when the environment is even slightly AoE makes him one of like the worst characters in the game, in my opinion, to invest in. He's just actually non-existent in certain types of content, and that's just it's a bit of an issue.
Little if any reason for you to do so, especially if you have Jian. Definitely a niche unit that's been circumstantially screwed, but until they make more Aero units,
like just look at how long he's taking to kill 2 elites. It's insane.
He's by no means a bad option for Jian's secondary. Alrighty, moving on into Electro, we have Mr. Cucumber. Coconut received a decent buff through the new Nightmare Echoes, and some more theory crafting was put into the guide to find his best team. Previously, it was Calzone and Yinlin, and while you can certainly go for that, I would argue Calcium and Shangli Yao work better for Quicksalt dual DPS. Because you lose the outro buff from Yinlin upon swapping back to her from Calculator, you don't really get a whole lot of value out of it.
I think that this is actually a decent pick. And another combination you can think about is Calcharo, or Cucumber, or Calzonius, or Conquistador, is Changli. Because of course, right, Changli buffs liberation damage on her outro, which you typically only get like 1 hit in for. Calcharo essentially has to swap cancel every death messenger, or you might as well just quit the game. And so Zhang Liao is another swap heavy character. The only problem is in this team comp is that, well, you need 2 Void Thunder sets, and that can be very high investment versus another team, right, where you're swapping around a Moonlit Clouds or you're swapping around an Empyrene Anthem Sonata set. Here, well, you're gonna have to invest in 2 DPS characters, and that can be a little bit expensive just to play 1 team. You can use Lingering Tunes on Zhang Liao. No, you can't if you're playing Quick Swap. You literally cannot use Lingering Tunes if you're in Quick Swap, so keep that in mind, ladies and gentlemen. Lingering Tunes' buff to attack ramps up the longer you're you're on field, and if you quick swap, you lose the entire Sonata set buff. A 5-piece Lingering Tunes is worse than a 2-piece 2-piece in quick swap. Just so you guys know, it is literally worse than a 2-piece 2-piece in quick swap.
Electro attackers can ironically swap into each other quite well. For your healer, Verena slightly edges out over Shorekeeper since quick swap teams get their second outro later than conventional hypercarry.
That's crazy. That's crazy. That's entirely right. That's entirely right. This is what I call character development, ladies and gentlemen. This is what I call character development. I love to see VARs differentiating like which support is better under certain circumstances with certain team comps, because he is 1,000,000% correct over here. Verena's much faster rotation time and faster access to her buffs relative to Shorekeeper make her a much bigger asset, especially in quick swap heavy teams. However, what I will note is that neither of these two characters benefit super heavily from an intro skill, unlike a Chang Li. And so Verena isn't like as ridiculously strong here as she is in like the Chang Li comps. So, but she still is like a very competitive option, right? And definitely that faster rotation time, big plus.
So you don't get her level 3 ultimate that quickly, but overall, despite being worth mentioning, it's a marginal difference. Yinlin's best team is hard to pinpoint since you can use her for many different purposes, but I would say it's still a hard tie between Shangli Yao and Jinxi. The new Empyrean Anthem set makes her significantly more useful with Jinxi than before, and naturally she's still a match made in heaven with Shangli Yao, so feel free to use her for either or. For your healer slot, if it's Jinxi, then go for Verena or Yohu if you're in a pinch, and if it's Shangli Yao, then you can go Verena or Shorekeeper.
Everything in the video has been good so far. I would say just don't even do it. Just pretend she's not there. Just pretend she's not there and only have Verena. This character is like just so bad, it's unbelievable. I think it would have been better to say VARs. Use Yohu if you have literally no Verena, or if Verena's on the other team. Because holy shit, she is just... Yohu's kit is a fucking mess. It's a complete disaster. It's just, she only works with coordinated attackers, but like Verena has the coordinated attacks. It's don't do it. Don't do it. It's an actual bait. Don't do it. He said Yohu if you're in a pinch. Hey, if you're in a pinch, just don't even run a sustainer. Don't even run Yohu.
Shorekeeper.
Just play 3 DPS.
Yuanwu's best team is still going to be with Jinxi. It's basically the only team you can functionally use him in, but to his credit, it is indeed a functional team if you don't have Zhe or Yinlin, or they're being used on a different team. For your healer, you want to go Verena since you're using Jinxi. Yuanwu's follow-up attack DPS is pretty bad, so there's no point in going Yohu.
One note when it comes to this team, maybe he didn't need to mention it, is that Yuanwu should be on the Rejuvenating Glow set with the Originite Gauntlet. Weave in a basic attack in his rotation to activate the self-healing, and then give Rejuvenating Glow's 15% attack buff to the team. Verena should instead be on Moonlit Clouds with ER3 costs, and Verena will now become like the outro bot who will charge up her concerto, and they give Jinxi an outro skill to, you know, go in and then go into her rotation, while Yuanwu basically never uses his outro skill or intros into Jinxi. So that's kind of like the way that you play that team comp, and so Verena's gonna have to be on Moonlit for this comp to work, and Yuanwu has to be on Rejuvenating Glow.
Shangli Yao's best team is going to be himself, Yinlin, and Shorekeeper or Verena. A more skill-intensive party can be himself and Changli, which can put out a bit more DPS if you're on point with your mechanics.
True. But the thing is, guys, if you've seen the gameplay of the Zhang Liao, Chang Li teams, to the extent where they out-damage a hypercarry rotation, you're going to get carpal tunnel. You're going to get arthritis. You're not going to have a good time later on in your life. And so get the ice pack ready if you're trying to learn this team. Maybe a little bit of Salam Plus, a bit of Bengay to rub on your wrists afterwards. Because holy moly, my hands hurt after playing some of these team comps rotations after like 15 minutes. And I am wondering what Wallenstein's health insurance is looking like, his health coverage, because brother man is about to have some problems later in life. 1,000,000%.
But I would say for the majority of players, stick to Shangli Yao, Yinlin, and Shorekeeper or Verena. But
I love that he says this. I fucking love that Vars says this right here. He just says for the majority of players, please just stick with the Yinlin team, because he's right, because he's entirely right, because a majority of players are going to struggle so much with the Zhang Liao Chang Li team that it is actually going to tank their DPS. But if you take that same exact player and you put them on this team, they will perform, they will clear the content, they will clear at like an 80, 85 to 90% level versus the 100% that a pro does, right? If a pro does 100% on Zhang Liao, the average player is going to do like 40 to 50%, and they might not actually clear because of how hard the comp is to play.
If you're on point with your mechanics. But I would say for the majority of players, stick to Zhang Liao, Yinlin, and Shorekeeper or Verena.
Absolutely. 1,000,000%. He's spot on here. Good shit.
But if you do want to go to the second party, then stick with Verena. Lumi is definitely one of the more strange units in the game, but thanks to her Ultra skill boosting skill damage, her best team at the moment will be Carlotta, herself, and one of the 2 Spectro healers.
So I bagged on this team comp because it requires you to do an abnormal rotation to get the full benefit of Lumi's outro skill. It is usable if you quick swap a little bit across your rotation on Carlotta. You like delay Lumi's outro skill until after Carlotta's like done her heavy attack. Otherwise, you will run out of time on Carlotta's liberation to actually have Lumi's outro buff for every single shot. You basically have to like use your forte on Carlotta, swap to Lumi, fill up Lumi's outro skill, go back onto Carlotta, and then proceed to Liberation, and then fire off all 4 shots right after Lumi just activated her outro skill. It is a rough rotation to do. It requires you to do things like Carlotta's heavy attack. It's way more complicated, and the incremental bonus is really low. The incremental bonus to her rotations is not really that good compared to a character like Yang Yang. So there's that.
Although inconveniently, Lumi's 10-second outro duration makes the timing pretty stringent for Carlotta compared to other attack style deepens that last 14 seconds.
Yep. Very, very good differentiation here.
Overall, it should still be doable. Okay, so for the fusion category, just a heads up, I will be mentioning Grant when discussing teams that can make use of him, as well as himself. But seeing as he's not out yet, and we only have his character story skill descriptions to work with, if theory crafters discover any worthwhile changes, be sure to look at the pinned comment. Anyways, let's continue. First character is going to be Tisha, and her best team is going to be herself, Chun-Li, and either Spectro healer. Being a dual DPS team, it can be a bit tricky to optimize, but it's far and away Tisha's best team. She got a decent amount of buffs courtesy of having a new 5-star gun option and the Nightmare Echoes, so this might be a good opportunity to test her out.
It's okay. The thing is, it is a dual DPS team, but Chisha's like need to like literally press her skill and then not do anything to gain her full buffs in her kit and deal the most damage is like an antithesis to Changli as a character. Chisha literally has to stand there, like slowly move back and then just start like firing her finger guns for like literally 5 fucking seconds to activate all of her buffs. And like Changli is like the opposite of wanting that in her teams. It's like a weird mix that just doesn't feel like it synergizes at all in normal gameplay. And that's why Chisha oftentimes just feels better as a solo character than actually playing with a teammate. Because her rotations are just like, I'm gonna be honest, there's a reason why she's not that popular. She kind of just feels like shit to play. It's like oil and water, yeah. She needs extended field time. Changli wants like the opposite of that. And it's like, it is her best team, but that just is credence to the fact that Chisha doesn't have a lot of good teams.
Next we have Encore. Encore's best team has been shifting around ever since the game came out depending on what role you want to play her in. If using her as the main attacker, definitely go with Encore, Sanhua, and either Spectro.
100% correct there.
Basic attack damage makes Sanhua her best overall partner in that regard.
It's still one of the strongest teams in the game, and for a free-to-play player that's like starting off the game, maybe doing a little bit of re-rolling, this is literally the strongest comp you can make. Because what you can do, right, is you can just go in, you pull Encore or Verena off the beginner 5-star, you choose whoever you didn't get with the selector, and then you get Sanhua for free. And then now you have like a pretty like S- A+ level, you know, tier team that is ready for the end game content.
However, there's a new team you can work her with, Encore and Brent. Brent's got quite a delicious outro skill buff that Encore can use, and while she's more of a basic attacker, a non-negligible portion of her DPS does contain skill damage, making him a worthwhile dual DPS partner for Encore. Either way, get them Spectro healers in here pronto.
I think that team is a little bit interesting. I think it definitely has like some potential. It has some potential there. I would just maybe think about like the level of like double dipping we might be doing in the healing category, where obviously Verena and Shorekeeper are going to heal, and Brand's going to heal as well as you build up his Forte circuit. And so It's a little bit a lot of healing, and the potential, right, is maybe Encore, Brant, and then someone else that's a bit more damage oriented to get this going.
And no, you cannot use Brant as your main healer.
I think you can. Why not? Bro has a shield. I think this is a bit of a premature take. From Vars, because I 100% think that Brant, with his built-in shield and his team-wide healing, I think that's enough sustain for most players. Because if Brant's sustain doesn't feel like enough, then it's almost a question of why is it even in his kit if you already need another sustainer anyways to make him work? You guys kind of get what I'm saying over here? What is the point of him having healing in the first place if it's like not good enough to solo sustain the team? That's the idea. It's not about sustain, but rather team-wide damage amp. I don't think that's the point that Vars is making. He just says he can't be the main healer. I don't think he brings in like damage amp buffs.
And no, you cannot use Brant as your main healer.
I mean, I don't think he talks about the buffing at all. Think about it this way, guys. Spectro Rover can solo heal a team, and their healing sucks ass. Their healing is like garbage, like bargain bin, Walmart great value healing.
Mortifee's best team is same old, Gia and Mortifee and the Spectro healers.
Okay.
Don't get me wrong, it's still a great team and one of the simplest ones to use. It's just been a long time since we've seen a new heavy attack DPS. Mortifee means you can keep doing what you're doing.
Bars, bit of a miss here, buddy boy. Another really strong Mortifee team is Phoebe, Spectro. I just talked about it. Spectro Rover healer, and then Mortifee as the sub DPS. I've shown it off in my video. This team over here, where Spectro Rover is essentially healing, Mortifee's going in as the sub DPS, and then going in and then buffing Phoebe's heavy attacks, right? And you know she casts 4 of them across her rotation. And believe me when I say the damage here, I mean, I know the tower buffs Frazzle teams, but that's pretty good for not using a Verena or a Shorekeeper, right? I think that's pretty good as one of the most budget teams in the game, where you don't have the outro amplifier buff from a sustain, but you do have these massive buffs to heavy attack from Mortifee. And I think it's a solid comp. I think it's one of the most free-to-play friendly comps in the game, because now you have a viable team without using Verena or Shorekeeper. And some people don't have Shorekeeper, they only have Verena. Now they have a viable team without using Verena in the first place. And that is a literal godsend for a lot of players. That's something that I maybe would have thrown in there for Mortifee, just as like, you know, another potential use case.
Changlei's best team, like Encore, appears to be changing every 2 seconds, but if I were to arrive at a conclusion, her best team is a tie between herself, Xiangli Yao and Verena for quick swap, or herself, Brant, and Shorekeeper or Verena.
I would say there's a lot of potential. I do think that these two teams are pretty spot on. You can also use Shorekeeper with the Zhang Liao and Changli team, but I would say instead of even a Verena or a Shorekeeper over here for the Brant Changli side, consider thinking about Sanhua, because you almost cycle your outro skills, right? Brant buffs skill damage, he goes to Changli, Changli buffs liberation damage, she goes to Sanhua, Sanhua then buffs basic attack damage, and she goes to Brant. Think about it almost as like the human centipede for like outro buffs. They're just all like going into each other. And that would be like the comp if you have Sanhua over here instead of like a typical sustain. Because you've got Brant doing all the healing you need.
Brant's outro skill is perfect for Changli, however given she's a quick swapper, you don't get to maintain the full extent of it. That and Brant isn't a liberation attacker, he's a basic attacker, so Changli's outro gets partially wasted.
But I would also think about it this way, guys. Changli's outro, if it's not going to Brant, it's kind of getting wasted on a Shorekeeper or a Verena. But on a Sanhua, for example, Sanhua's liberation at least does something, right? At least it's like a somewhat decent scaling part of her kit. And then she's got that basic attack damage amp that goes into Brant and buffs all of his stuff. So I kind of think the Sanhua team is going to be better. I think Brant's healing is going to be enough.
All the same, the Theater Kit's definitely a buff to Changli, so you can use either team comfortably. Speaking of Theater Kid, even though he's technically not out yet, and therefore it's hard to run calculations based on what we know about his abilities and whatnot, and just by looking at him, his best team will more likely than not be Changli, himself, and Spectro Healer. Considering his skill and forte both have basic attack damage, there's also a high chance he can be paired up with Sanhua.
This would be him as more of a main DPS, stacking some outro skills. Again, Sanhua, Changli, Brant. I know I'm going to be trying that comp on release, and I think it's going to be pretty okay.
As if we thought Carlotta and Phoebe weren't enough, now there's Brant. Sanhua's quickly turning into the best character in the game at this point. In any case, remember to refer to the pinned comment if something new comes up, but TLDR, dual DPS go Changli and Brant, main DPS go Brant and Sanhua. Healers are the same regardless. On to Glacio, let's talk about Sanhua, everyone's favorite secondary. Sanhua's best team is everyone. Next.
If we're being entirely honest here, it is with Camellia. If we're being entirely honest here, it is with Camellia. She's not that good with Phoebe. She's okay with Encore. She's Encore's best support, but Sanhua's best DPS is Camellia. Sanhua's best DPS is Camellia.
Okay, real talk. Despite being usable in upwards of half a dozen parties, I think the one who benefits from her the most is without a doubt Camellia. So we're gonna...
Okay, good job, Vars. Good job, Vars. That's what I'm fucking talking about. That is what I am talking about, brother. That's what I'm talking about. He knows. He knows.
Go Camellia, Sanhua, and Shorekeeper or Verena. But of course, you can use Sanhua for literally anything. Have at it. Would you believe me if I told you Baija has an actual optimal party? It's a fairly niche one, but she can be decently competitive in it. Carlotta, Jota, and
He knows. He knows. This is 1,000,000% Baija's best team because she's the only healer in the game that also buffs. Well, Verena does it S4, but Baija's S6 buffs Glacio damage on the team. He knows.
Reason being, Baija's S6 increases your party's Glacio damage, giving her some good pressure for Jota and Carlotta. It's also worth looking into considering your Frieza, Verena, and Shorekeeper.
True. The number of accounts that I've used Baija, like a level 50 Baija with just her first passive on as the support, and then just like Carlotta and Jeja kind of carry with S6 Baija's bonuses, very high. And if you think about it from that perspective, Baija actually gives bigger buffs than Verena, but obviously at a much slower pace and with much more clunkiness. But in the Jeja Baija team, in these two characters setup, Jeja doesn't really need to swap cancel, right, to gain any efficiency. Baija, when she swap cancel to, will like throw out an attack that takes like a full fucking second to land. It doesn't give you a forte circuit. It does no damage. It just locks your fucking actions for a full second. It functionally does nothing but just add clunkiness to the character. And because you're using Jeja, you don't have to worry about that. In that, Jeja just does one basic attack chain, liberations, and then goes and then starts teleporting around and you're good. She almost like eases the fact that Baija is so clunky while swapping because Jeja doesn't really need to swap. She can optimize her combo by swapping, but it doesn't really do like a huge amount.
For other teams, Ling Yang's best party is going to be himself, Jota, and Shorekeeper or Verena.
You could just skip this character too.
Jota's personal damage and outro skill work well with him, especially since optimal rotations make more use of skill damage than basic attack. You can also do Sanhua in place of Jota if you plan on using the artist for a better team like Carlotta. On that note, Jota has two best teams in my opinion. First one is Jinchi with Verena as your healer. Despite Carlotta making better use of her outro skill, Jinchi still makes excellent use of Jota.
I would keep in mind though, this will be the best team for Jeja in the Tower of Adversity, but holy shit, if you play this team in Whimpering Wastes, you might want to uninstall the game. I'm not even, if you play this team in Wiwa, in Whimpering Wastes, you will get close to uninstalling the game. It is so bad. Jeja and Jinsi together are so bad in Whimpering Wastes. I almost I regretted something. I didn't know what I regretted, but I just knew I regretted something because holy shit, their performance together is absolute dog shit. Please, for the sake of your sanity, use Yinlin with Jinsi in Whimpering Wastes. Please do not use this team in Whimpering Wastes.
Other best team for Jota is Carlotta. Glacio and skill damage on outro, perfect.
This team will work in Whimpering Wastes. This team, surprisingly enough, for some reason, actually works in Wiwa, but this team, on the other hand, oh my gosh, it's unplayable.
Carlotta, who also attacks a bunch of times thanks to her liberation. In that case, go Shorekeeper or Verena. Yohu's best team is quite literally a copy of the Jota sec.
Just don't even build this character. He's so bad.
Except substitute the Spectro healers for herself, so Carlotta or Jinxi and then Jota. Now with the Empyrean set being the new best in slot for Yinlin, you can also technically pair Yohu with her and subsequently your teams if you so choose. To repeat it one more time.
That's a good call out. That's a good call out at Empyrean Anthem because Empyrean Anthem does a big like damage bonus, right? And then Yohu's outro skill is coordinated attack amplification. And the damage bonuses on a character's coordinated attacks can get very, very high with the addition of that new set.
Carlotta's best team is a copy of the previous three characters. Carlotta, Jota, and the Spectro healer. TLDR, every Glacio unit wants Jota unless your name is Sanhua. Wait, actually, I would argue that Baija might be ever so slightly better than Verena in Carlotta teams.
If you're willing to deal with the slightly slower rotation for some better damage buffs, he is correct here.
So I changed my mind. Go Shorekeeper first, then Baija, then Verena in that order. The difference is overall pretty minuscule though.
I would say if he's for some additional teams that feature Carlotta and then a sustainer, I would say let's maybe throw in a Yang Yang and a Tao Chi in there. Yang Yang specifically at S6 with that attack buff is a pretty decent alternative, and in Weewa can also provide some grouping too. Tao Chi on the other hand is kind of just like a TOA only thing and requires your Carlotta to have like 120 to 125 ER, but Tao Chi, incredible buffer as well. Just stick an R5 Discord on her, Concerto energy generating Broadblade, and you'll just go ahead and you'll have a decently fast rotation time on Tao Chi and then go murder the content. It'll be fine.
First character in the Havoc department is going to be Tao Chi.
Of course. Okay, so yeah, that's what I just said, but here.
Tao Chi's best team is, I would say, Carlotta. So you want to go Carlotta, Tao Chi, and then Shorekeeper or Verena. Not the worst option there, since both Zhezhe and Zanhua are high demand characters, so if you actually geared up the Sleepy Mommy, then by all means. Danjin has too many teams, way too many teams. If you want a player for main DPS, then play Danjin, Rocha, and Spectro Healer. If you want a player as support, then go Camellia, Danjin, and Spectro Healer.
I would say for Danjin main DPS, I don't know about Rosia if I'm being entirely honest. Danjin does almost negative damage with basic attacks. Danjin actually almost deals 0 damage with basic attacks. All of her damage is basically lib, skill, and heavy. And so I would even say like Mortife's actually okay as a Danjin support. Mortife's actually okay. Tao Chi is like sort of cope, and I would say Mortife is a little bit more interesting here, and Zhezhe is actually kind of okay as well. I mean, I could see it just from the perspective of like Rosia groups them, and so Danjin can actually hit things. Yeah, maybe.
If your Camellia is already using someone else, then go for Havoc, Rover, and Danjin.
This is fair. The Camellia Danjin team is like, it's usable, but nobody ever uses it because Danjin's rotation, while fast, is inherently more clunky and requires like a lot more button presses. And sometimes, right, well, you're playing Danjin, so you might just like get hit and die. And, you know, when Sanhua is a lot more, you know, fluid to play, a lot easier to play, you just swap cancel her heavy after, you know, rolling your face on your keyboard. You're basically good to go on Sanhua, while in Danjin, you've got to press stuff a little bit more strategically. Yeah. But this team over here, very solid, right? Because Havoc Rover does a good mix of damage, and Danjin just buffs the Havoc attribute without discrimination.
Girl has too many teams. She might not be best in slot in any of them anymore, but she's still a very serviceable character.
True.
Camelia's best team is going to be herself, Rocha, and either Shorekeeper or Verena. Out of all the potential Havoc supports, Rocha offers the biggest boost in DPS, but like I explained in my video on her, Sanhua isn't that far off, so in a pinch you can go Camellia and Sanhua. Havoc Rover's best party mirrors Camellia's. You want to go themselves, Rocha, and Spectro Healer. Danjin and Sanhua can still be decent choices for Havoc Rover if using Rocha for Camellia. Again, the difference between S0 or 0 Rocha and other supports for Havoc DPS is pretty tight.
I would say Danjin is above Sanhua for Havoc Rover.
So despite Rocha technically being the best, you're not missing out by much if you go for the second or third best options. And on the subject of Rocha, Rocha's best team is Camellia, Rocha, and Shorekeeper or Verena.
I would say the most complicated part of this video, and I guess like something that Vars had kept in mind while like scripting it, is that you do end up repeating yourself a little often. And it's no fault at all to him. It's simply due to the fact that the topic is the best teammate. And so I would say in the future, I don't know if it makes more sense to divide this by the role of the character versus the attribute. Because the way that the attribute buffs are going to work in Wu is that like a lot of characters, right, will buff their attribute and then another damage type if they're a premium sub DPS. And by going through attribute by attribute, you're gonna end up like repeating yourself within like a 30-second frame of time, right, potentially. And that's unfortunately what we're seeing here. But, you know, no fault at all to Vars because he is spitting here. He is spitting here, but it's like, you know, maybe like a structural thing to look into.
I would actually argue Shorekeeper's a bit better in this team since you can supplement Rocha's quick break point in addition to Camellia's damage.
I think Shorekeeper is just mandatory here because Camellia and Rosia have no crit rate upgrades in their skill tree. They only have critical damage. And so Camellia and Rosia are two characters who like almost have very low crit rates. It's not very frequent you see these characters in the stat screen with above like 72% crit rate. They're usually at like high 60s. Just use a crit rate forecast and get Camellia's S3. How about you go fuck yourself?
If you can get the Cotton Candy Girl to 70% on your own, then Verena's a perfectly serviceable healer nonetheless. Alright, we're down to the final element, Spectro. Jinchi's best team's gonna be herself, Jojo, and one of her fellow elemental compatriots for healing.
I hope he distinguishes between TOA and Weewa. I pray that he distinguishes between TOA and Weewa, because while this might be her best team in TOA, like we mentioned before, Weewa, just uninstall the game. At that point, right? If you're playing these two, you will want to uninstall the game because it'll be so hard to get any score above 2.5k playing this team comp because it's like nothing works. Nothing works when you're playing these characters together in Weewa.
Forte Circuit's power being contingent on coordinated attacks, I would say Verena carries more equity in this department. However, as a hyper carry with a Forte attack that can straight up one-tap most bosses, missing a crit on that move can make or break a run. So
True.
Shorekeeper's crit boost is also just as important.
Yeah, that's true, but you get off way more of like the empowered attacks with Verena. I'm glad that he's listing the trade-offs over here because there are times when you will feel like one is better than the other.
Whichever you prioritize, but I think Verena is still a bit better.
What I would have said over here, just as like an add-on, is like for the Whimpering Waste game mode, right, which is a lot more tailored towards AoE, the whole team with Yinlin instead, where she has much more frequent application, she has way more AoE potential, a lot more like AoE nuking, and she ends up shoring up, Yinlin ends up shoring up a lot of Jinxi's weaknesses in the game mode and makes her feel way more playable. The difference between like Jeja and a Yinlin in Weewa is absolutely insane if you're using this character.
Spectro Rover got changed a ton in recent patches. New echoes, new teammates, and a new
They've
role
only
to
got
boot.
one team.
Their best team's always going to involve Phoebe as the main attacker, but from then on you can go one of two roles. You can either put Rover as the secondary with the Eternal Radiance set, or as the healer with the Rejuvenating Glow set.
Nice. Hey, not bad. Not bad.
Should you choose to go the former, Phoebe, Rover, and Shorekeeper or Verena. Alternatively, you can
Okay.
go Phoebe, Sunhwa, or Mortefi and have Rover work as your healer.
Okay, so I remember when I was on the Mortefi section, I was listing out Phoebe as an alternative. And yeah, he's already factored it in over here. I would say that Mortefi as a whole, though, is much better than Sunhwa. Because Sunhwa is a basic attack buffer. And while Phoebe's basic attacks she is doing a lot of them, she doesn't do like that much damage with them, if I'm being entirely honest. I don't think Phoebe does like an exceptional amount of basic attack damage. Most of her damage is in fact in her heavies. And so knowing that most of her damage is in her heavies, I think it's fair to say that Mortefi is typically a bit more of a reliable one in the sub DPS role over here.
You can mess around with that however you'd like. Glad to see they're keeping both elements of the main character relevant. Phoebe's best team is, well, I kinda just went over her team in
Yeah, this is why I think it's a little bit dicey to go with the attribute structuring. He's beginning to recognize it himself. He's becoming self-aware.
Rover section, so you can go back like 20 seconds, but in case you skip to her section, her best team includes Spectro Rover in either version, but then you can use this team in two different ways. Either put Rover as their secondary and then go Shorekeeper or Verena, or if you're trying to keep the healers for the other teams, you can go Rover as your healer and then run Sunhwa or Mortefi for your secondary. It is a riskier combo to go for, but keep in mind, the slowdown on Rover's outro and the freeze on VP skill can alleviate that.
The enemies will be CC'd so much, they will just have like less opportunities to attack you. And guys, Rover does have healing. You can build the Rover for healing. You can run 5 attack main stats. If you really want Rover to heal, you can go in and give them 5 attack main stats because their healing scales off attack. 4 attack main stats, 3, 3, 1, 1, and then a healing bonus 4 cost. The only thing is, nobody has attack 3 costs on the Rejuvenating Glow set, so nobody's really experimented with it, and the person that's metagaming that hard will typically just like dodge. So it's kind of like an odd situation where it's like the option for Giga Healing Rover is there, but the people that are thinking about Giga Healing Rover don't really need it. You have to be like a sort of like sweatier budget player that also gets hit often, and that's kind of like an odd combo to have.
Okay, now Shorekeeper and Verena.
Oh, he's fucked. Oh, good luck, buddy. Ooh, good luck, buddy. I wonder how you're going to decide on a best team for either of these characters. Good luck, buddy. You're cooked.
It's time for the moment you've been waiting for. Da, 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 da.
Fair.
That wraps up my video on the best team for every character in Wuthering Waves as of 2.1. I hope
Fair.
it was insightful to those who need.
Well, I mean, it was funny as fuck. I would have at least like maybe made like a slight differentiation. I would have made like a slight differentiation over here just between like dual DPS for Arena and then Shorekeeper for Hyper Carry. That's what I would have done. Just as like a really small like final thing after the joke. But, you know, him not doing it, not a huge deal because he already made some of those distinctions before. But yeah, people might be skipping around, so maybe just something to keep in mind.
I hope it was insightful to those who needed it and entertaining to those who wanted it. As a reminder, Wuwa is fundamentally a skill and mechanics-based scheme. Learning attack patterns and your own party's capabilities takes precedence over having the most optimal team. You can have a full whale party and still have a tough time beating bosses because of skill issue.
True.
So while team building is important, you can more than succeed with a quote-unquote less optimal lineup.
True. And the thing is, HP scaling, enemy tankiness, all of these factors that are making games like HSR or Genshin Impact a lot more unplayable unless you pull the newest characters who are broken. That just doesn't really exist in Wuwa. When we think about things like the damage increase of newer members of the roster, that's just not really there for Wuwa. And most of like the clear doesn't come from your substats. A lot of it does, but most of it comes from your rotations and how you're actually going about your actual gameplay.
Let me know in the comments down below if you potentially disagree with any of my teams, and if you do, be sure to include what party you think would be better. For the time being though, if you enjoyed the video,
I'm gonna be honest, Vars, I think that you made a pretty just solid set of takes across this entire vid. I think the only thing that I would potentially disagree with you on across this entire vid is your section on Brant. And the thing is, that's because we just simply have not had the time to actually play him in team comps. That is the only reason why we would have any potential disagreement at all. But everything else, it's entirely, completely spot on. I love that you provided some alternatives to some of the team comps that are maybe like more budget. And I do think you've thought of like basically maybe like one more team for Dan Jin as a main DPS. But I think you thought of basically everything when it comes to this. Solid job. Good stuff. I would say overall, this was again, I can't mention enough how much of like a step up this is from some of the content in the past where, you know, we were maybe saying that like dual DPS characters are the same as hyper carry. And now we're making extreme distinctions over here when it comes to the supports. And so again, awesome vid, awesome points, great arguments. Nothing for me to even try to dig into over here. It's just more like theory crafting and guessing when it comes to Brant and his kit. I still think Sanhua is going to be #1 in the Changli team, but we'll see in a week. But with that, let me know what you all think, everybody. I think it was a great vid, good content. Peace out.